I used to give talks about lectures about the Israeli economy, and I called them the Israeli Paradox. Why paradox? Because when we look about our relative position relative to other countries in the world, you'll see that we are well below the average of the developed economies. These are developed economies, and the average of the OECD is almost $40,000 per capita, per person. In Israel, it's 33.5, which is again well below the average. So why is it a paradox? I mean, someone has to be between Spain and the Czech Republic, and it so happens that it's Israel over there. That's not a paradox. The paradox is because we've been going through an amazing transition in the Israeli economy. Now, you are too young to remember, but something like 30 years ago, even 20 years ago, Israel's current account was in the negative side. I mean, our imports were always, until 2003, below our export. Our imports were much greater than our exports. And because we've been importing much more than we were exporting, we were relying on gifts. Gifts mainly from the Jewish, the US Jewry, the Jews from the United States. And also the American government. But if the American government gave us something like $3 billion annually, the Jews were giving us something like $5 billion annually. And all that changed in 2003. And since 2003, we have a positive current account, which means that since 2003, we are not relying anymore on gifts from anyone. So that's a big change. For example, I'll show you another change. Look at the public debt as a percent of GDP. Our public debt was very, very large 20 years ago relative to the rest of the world. It was almost 100% of GDP, while the US was less than 60%, and the average of the OECD was something like 72%. But that changed in the last 20 years. In the last 20 years, our debt declined very drastically, and it's now something like 64.8, approximately. While in other countries, it grew very rapidly. So now the US has more than 100% ratio of GDP, debt to GDP, and also the rest of the large developed economies. So we've been behaving quite well in the last 20 years. Our exports increased, our debt declined, and if you look at the annual budget deficits, they've been under control in the last 20 years. You remember that according to the Maastricht Treaty, governments should maintain deficit below 3%. They don't do it anymore in Europe. Most of the European countries have much larger deficits. We've been behaving quite reasonably. Last year it was 2.1. But then, although our debt to GDP declined, whereas in the rest of the world, debt to GDP increased, although we've been maintaining reasonable deficits, we did not close the gap to the rest of the world. Our GDP per capita has been something like 20-25% below the average of the OECD 40 years ago, and it's still 20-25% below the OECD countries today. And that's a paradox. Now, something else that I usually show with many slides, but now I don't have the time to, and I'll finish my presentation with that. Something else which, again, you don't know. You know that Israel is the startup nation. It is the startup nation, really. It's not a myth. It's amazing how many startups we have here, and not just startups. We have an amazing high-tech industry. You know, something like almost 10% of the cyber industry in the world is concentrated in Israel. And that's not per capita. We are second only to the United States in terms of the size, of the absolute size of the cyber industry. So now we have an amazing high-tech industry, which is very profitable, of course. It produces huge surpluses. 25 years ago, we didn't have any of that. 25 years ago, you know what, let's go 30 years ago, just to be on the safe side. 30 years ago, you could not indicate a single sector in Israel which is developed relative to the rest of the world. By the way, this is why then our exports were very low, and now our exports are very high, because we didn't have much to sell to the rest of the world. So although all those wonderful things happened in the last 20, 30 years, it doesn't show in the gap in terms of GDP per capita. We don't even close the gap to the developed world in GDP per capita. So that's my presentation, the 10 minutes presentation you asked me to.
The price of housing here in Israel is, I know, a big concern to people. We learned it takes about 13 years to get the approval, according to the central bank, for a new project. Can anything be done about that?
Sure, a lot. But it's a huge monster. It's a huge bureaucratic monster, and to control such a monster is such a hard task. Now, whether they'll succeed or not, I don't know. But at least I know that very good people are trying to.
So the reducing of the permitting process is one step in the right direction. There's always a temptation to subsidize housing as a way to make it more affordable, which tends to increase the demand and push up the price further, which then increases people's clamor and desire for more subsidy. Are we on that path, or is there an alternative maybe?
We are on this path because the finance minister proved in his election campaign to reduce the price of housing. Now, as we know, to increase supply, which is really something that everyone wants, is very, very hard.
Yeah.
And you know, in Israeli politics, you don't have a lot of time to accomplish things like that. So since it doesn't seem like the effort which is being done right now to help with the bureaucracy is going to have fruits in the coming year or two, then the finance minister who wants a solution sooner than the 10 years it would take to solve the problem in a fundamental way. He thinks that by subsidizing land, he would be able to reduce the prices in a year or two.
What do you think?
I'm waiting to see. I mean, I don't know. I have no idea.
You're open to it. Okay, that's nice. Let's talk about food prices. Coming from the United States, it's hard to understand, although it's not that hard, because we do some very strange things with dairy. I once wanted to teach my students about the subsidies to the dairy farmers in the United States. I read about it for a while, I read some articles on it, couldn't figure it out. I'm not smart enough. So I think the program is designed so that it can't be figured out in America. Now here in Israel, it seems somewhat straightforward. We have cartels who have control over entry, who have restrictions on imports, who control the prices. Part of that means a lower standard of living, a lower purchasing power, right? So what can be done about that?
Well, first you gave a pretty good description of especially the dairy market in Israel. It is an amazing market. I mean, there are quotas for production of milk, of raw milk.
Yeah.
Then there is one big monopoly. Actually, there are two smaller companies, but there's one company that controls more than 50% of the market. So yeah, it's not a very efficient market, that's for sure. What can be done about it? First, to abolish the quota system, and actually the Minister of Agriculture and the Finance Minister agreed to do that. This is something that had been here since the establishment of the state. And if they are going to do what they promised, it's really a very big change, a huge reform. Not a minute too soon, of course, and I hope that that will help. But there's something else I must mention. The taxes on food in Israel are the highest in the developed world, except for Denmark. Only in Denmark, the taxes on food are that high. So that's part of the thing. That's part of the problem. Because if you tax them at 17%, it means that the price of food is 17% higher. And by the way, you are coming from the United States. But relative to the whole of the OECD, the price of food in Israel is only 3% higher than the average. It's
Yes,
not. The United States is something different. But then, since I lived for 5 years in the United States, I could never find good cheese, good cottage cheese in the United States, and I was looking everywhere. I was willing to pay anything, any price, just get me good cheese.
All the presidential candidates are talking about it this year. They're all embarrassed.
So coming from the United States, I wouldn't boast at your dairy market. It's cheap. It's cheap, but who wants to eat it?
A more serious question I have.
That was very serious.
Well, I'm not sure you want to compare yourself to the OECD. It's like being the tallest pygmy. But
how do you know?
Yeah.
Do you know another world?
I know that the OECD has the same political problems that the United States has and that Israel has, which is that small groups have a lot of political power, and they can often outweigh the majority's desire for inexpensive or better food. So the farmers in Europe are very powerful. I think I know that. But I want to ask you a question about education.
Yeah.
So you have a hard job, right?
Yeah.
There's politics, there's economics. How much of your day can you spend, are you able to spend, trying to make the case for good economics, good public policy, with people who have to listen to other forces, the political forces and other things? Do you find yourself as a teacher any time during a typical week?
No, because in the environment where we are spending our days,
Yeah.
Everyone knows everything. And trying to explain to someone something,
Yeah, no, it's true.
tell him, listen, let me teach you. Let me teach you. You have only a first degree in economics. I've been studying economics all my life. You are 25 years with a first degree. You were my student. I know exactly what you want, and I want to teach you something.
They're not
No
so
way.
interested, yeah.
No way. They know everything. So there's no point trying to teach someone anything.
Well, let's all go home now. Save a day for the conference.
No. I meant in the government. They're not still in the government.
Good point. There's still hope. Let's talk about the role of unions, which is smaller than it used to be here in Israel, but still quite strong. What do you see as the challenge there for the Israeli economy that unions provide?
Listen, this is democracy. Those unions did not force themselves on the rest of the people. They get their strength, their power from the will of the people. They are able to convince the people that they protect their interests. So there's no point going to the unions and saying, you are bad for the economy, you are doing bad things. Those people were elected. They were not, nominated by someone. They were elected. So it's not very productive to get into fights with the unions.
But do you think they do protect the workers who are helping, who are they're working with?
They're protecting some workers, of course. Again, people are not stupid. After I've been in the government this is my second term in the government. I used to be the advisor for the finance minister. And I realized, it was a shock to me, but I realized that people are not stupid. People realize, people understand when they see a politician speaking. They know somehow, without studying economics or anything else, they know whether this person is saying the truth. They know whether he's Hippocratic, that's the word?
A hypocrite.
A hypocrite. They have this sense.
Yeah.
So if those unions were doing only bad things for everyone, they wouldn't be there.
Are they protected, though, in ways by legislation and laws that make it easier for them, perhaps, to not always serve their workers or the country as a whole?
Of course, that happens. I can give you an example precisely about this point. For example, the union of the unions in Israel is operating according to a law from before the time of the state. It's an Ottoman law. And now, since they were formed in 1920, and they were formed according to this law, they are governed by this law. So, for example, you cannot get information about their finances. You don't know how much money they spend on what.
Yeah.
So
Not
that's
ideal.
of course that's of course is a very bad thing.
Not good. Any way that can change? Any Ottomans around?
Yeah. I would really whether it could change, it will change. All those bad things, at some point, they change. Sometimes it takes a year, sometimes 10 years, sometimes 100 years, but they do change.
Yes, one argument is they change when it becomes the political forces come into line that make them change.
Exactly.
But sometimes they change because someone steps up to take a chance.
Right.
And taking a chance is expensive, risky. Do you think Mr. Netanyahu can find some areas in economics where he wants to make a difference?
Of course he wants to make a difference. He does make a difference. But, the notion that the prime minister, since he is the prime minister, has these powers to do whatever he wants, that is not the case. I mean, look at the United States. There, the president has much more powers than the prime minister in Israel. And still, the President of the United States tried to do a couple of things, and he wasn't able to do it. The only thing he was able to do is the Obamacare.
Yep.
So he managed to do that. But he wanted to raise the minimum wage. He didn't succeed. He wanted to impose a tax on gasoline, I think. He did not succeed.
He's got a lot of ideas.
Yeah, right. So it's very, very hard. So the very fact that he's a prime minister doesn't make him someone who can do whatever he wants. It's a very, very delicate operation that he has to run.
Let's talk about the energy market, and obviously the recent Supreme Court decision has caused some concern. You can't do anything about that, obviously.
Right. You don't want to do anything
Correct.
about it.
No, I'm with you there. The question is, it's not good that companies that want to invest in Israel are unsure about the costs of that investment. What can be done to make that environment a little more certain?
That's a very important question that you're asking. So, listen, we have, all we can do is just to proceed in the way that we are doing. I mean, first, you can see that there are strong courts of law, and that's the very basic condition for bringing over foreign companies, the knowledge that the rule of law, that the law rules here. Except for that, I mean, we have to show ourselves so that people trust us, that we don't change the rules in such a way that would hurt them. And actually, you know what? The foreign direct investment to Israel is very, very high. The FDI is very, very high. So it seems that foreign investors do believe in us.
I think that's true, and I think the energy case is kind of a special case because the magnitude of the investment that's required. I think one of the challenges, though, as you know, is that if it's a question of trusting me, for you, we can build trust, right? A prime minister can build trust. But when you have 10 people who have independent control over things, then it's harder to build trust because each person has an incentive to free ride on the trust created by others. That seems to be a problem here, perhaps.
No, I don't think so, because again, just observe the foreign direct investment to Israel. They are very high. They never were that high, and relative to GDP, they are one of they are one of the highest in the world. So I don't think there is a real problem here.
I think the reason it's the highest in the world is in this room right now. We have a room of 100 incredibly bright,
You
young...
caught me here.
What?
You caught me there.
Yeah, no, I'm not disagreeing with you. It's part of it is this incredible opportunity, right?
Yeah.
That the talent here in this country is so inspiring and so tremendous that it helps, but, and I really think, I don't think it's hurt. I don't think the high-tech sector is hurt, the FDI there is hurt by the issues I'm talking about. I think it really is probably an energy, the unusual nature of this particular opportunity is very challenging.
Yeah. I don't see a real problem, really.
Well, it'd be a shame if we didn't get that energy out of the ground.
We'll get it if there are economic incentives to get it out of the ground. It will be taken out of the ground. The problem, the big problem, is not the Supreme Court. The big problem is the price of gas, the price of oil. If the price of oil was 100% a barrel, I can assure you that they would have taken it out without.
Interesting. Yeah, good point. Let me change a little bit, ask you maybe a little bit of a different...
But by the way, there aren't many explorations in other parts of the world, and actually I think that Nobel stopped its explorations in the United States. And there it's
we
not...
have our own problems.
And there it's not because of the Supreme Court.
Yeah, we have our own problems in the United States. Every country faces these kind of challenges in developing resources that have high value. Many countries have been ruined by this phenomenon. But I want to ask you something very different, which is, when we think about the foreign policy situation and the threats to Israel's security, as an economist, and I don't pretend to know anything about foreign policy, I do pretend to know something about economics. It's pretend, but I do pretend.
No,
And
not
what-
as an economist, but as a Jew, you know everything about it.
But in foreign policy, in the issue of security, I've always hoped for improved economic relations between Israel and its neighbors as a way to reduce the potential for war. And of course, the opportunities there go up and down with the climate of trust and of danger. And is there anything happening encouraging on that front that Israel is possibly trading with countries that face Israel as some kind of threat, perhaps?
No. No. I think that, you know, let's move to the next question.
That's fine. If you could pass one law to help the Israeli economy, what would it be? That is, where do you think is the lowest hanging fruit? What's the best opportunity to make a difference?
Whoa, that's a very difficult
It's a hard
question.
question, I know.
You should have prepared me.
I apologize. You want to think about it for a minute? I'll ask you another one.
Well, I can tell you one thing. I'm not sure that's probably after I leave the room, I'll think of a much better answer. But I'll give you one answer which really bothers me. It turns out that to enforce contracts takes a very long time in Israel. It's a very, very long procedure. In the doing business report, they found out that if one company owes another company 200,000 shekels, and the other company doesn't want to pay, then it would take 859 days to retrieve
It's a long time.
the money. And that's a very, very long time, and I think it's a very big problem, which has a huge adverse effect on the economy.
What do you see as the public concern about economic issues? You and I might say these are the problems facing Israel. Do you hear from the public different issues that you are perhaps not so worried about? Inequality would be an example. Are you worried about that? Do you think that's an issue we should deal with? If I can say we, I've been here 10 days. I'm an expert.
Yeah, well, really, the level of inequality in Israel is huge. It's very high. It's like in the United States. So here we resemble the United States. We are the two countries with the highest level of inequality in the OECD. Good for us, and except for Mexico, I think, in the developed economies.
Okay.
The reasons why inequality in Israel is so high is really related to Israeli issues. You know, it's very high among the Haredi community. It's the highest among the Haredi community. In the Haredi community, something like 60% are poor.
Very poor.
Yes, so that's a phenomenon which we are all aware of, but the Haredi community is saying, listen, leave it to us. Don't interfere with what we do. If you're willing to raise the child allowances, great, do that. But don't tell us how to live our lives. Don't tell us what we should do not to be poor.
Just give us the money.
Just give us the money, right. And, so I don't think there is a parallel situation in other countries.
It's very unusual. There's a related issue I wanted to ask you about. We talked about it a minute before the microphones were turned on, which is black market activity. That is, activity that is done in cash, payments that are made in cash without any tax coverage.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked, before we turned the microphones on, is that if that were included in the data, how much higher might Israel's per capita income be? And do you view it as a problem anyway? This economy underground.
First, no one knows. No one knows something you cannot see.
Yeah.
My guess my guess is that it's not a huge problem. I mean, depends what you mean by a huge problem. It's not that 30% of the economy is in the black is a black economy. I don't know. Maybe it's 5%, 10%, not more than that.
I wonder when I hear the unemployment rate, though, for say Arab Israelis or the Haredi community, that perhaps some of that is deceptive. It's not as bad as it looks.
No, unemployment rates are low of the Haredi community, also of the Arabs. It's not as low as among the Jews, but it's pretty low. The issue is about the participation rate.
Yeah,
how many of them participate in the market in the first place? But then, participation rate in Israel, the average participation rate in Israel, is higher than in the United States. It's above the average of the OECD. So I don't think that's the main problem. It's not the thing that will help us is not to get people who could earn 100,000 shekels a year to get them into the market. The thing is to make them earn not 100,000 shekels, but 1.5 million. That's the problem. That's the challenge.
So let's go back to inequality for a minute. In the United States, I worry less about inequality and more about its cause, because there's some inequality that's not so bad, because people produce a great product and they get successful, and I'm happy for them, because they improve the lives of other people. Then there are people who get successful by taking money away from other people with the help of the government. That's the bad kind. But at the bottom end, I'm worried about people who are not participating in the economy, not in the literal sense. They may have a job, but they struggle because the education system does not prepare them. In the United States, it's a terrible problem. Is it a problem here in Israel, and what might be done to improve it?
Well, it is a problem.
But you think it's something that needs some work, ideally?
Of course, everything needs. Nothing is perfect. You can improve on anything.
Could you talk about the dynamic in the government in terms of how decisions are made and what your role is in the way decisions are made?
Whoa, that's a very long question, and I'm not sure I could answer that in Hebrew. You want me to answer that in English? It's a very, very complicated process. The thing about government is that it's not that there's someone telling someone else what to do. It doesn't work this way. You know what's the authority of the prime minister? What does the prime minister is allowed to do? He has two powers. The prime minister has two powers. One, he decides what issue is raised in the government. That's one. Two, he can fire a minister. That's it. That's it. Now, given that he cannot fire a minister without losing his government, you know, that's the case in a coalition government, it leaves him with only one power to raise issues in the government. So he cannot tell the, say, transportation minister, I want this road to be improved over there. I mean, he can say it, but no one is going to do it. So it's a very, very complex system.
So there is a big gap between the productivity per hour between the United States and Israel. It's about between $66 to $36 per hour. What would you think would be the most two important things that Israel should do in order to close this gap?
As I said before, I don't really know. I'm serious about it.
What are the reasons for this gap?
I don't know. I mean, I have some notions, I have some suggestions, but this is a huge gap. It's a huge gap. And I don't know anyone who knows. I mean, I know many people who say, here's my answer to this question. I don't buy those answers.
So there is nothing that should be done?
No, of course there are many things that should be done, like what I told you about the judiciary system to make it more efficient. We want to make our tax system more efficient. We want to enable the creation of public infrastructure in a more efficient way. So what we are doing is trying to make things more efficient. But I cannot give you a silver bullet, one solution that cuts through this thing. So all we are trying to do, what I'm trying to do, is improve things. Improve the tax system, improve the judicial system, improve the way the government constructs infrastructure, improve the competition in the banking system. These are the things that I've been dealing with in the last couple of hours, and stuff like that. But I cannot give you a single answer, one thing that would solve the problem.
In the beginning of your presentation, you showed that in the beginning of the State of Israel, we were very dependent on gifts from the Jewish community and the Jewish in the U.S. and the things changed with the debt and as percent of the GDP. Do you think that today we can be less dependent on gifts?
We are not dependent on gifts anymore. Do you know that Israel has a surplus of assets versus obligations in foreign assets of something like $70 billion? It means that if you take all the money that people in Israel, banks, private companies, government, all the obligations to foreign agents, and then you take the opposite, what foreign agents owe Israelis, then we have a surplus of $70 billion.
Okay, one more question, unfortunately.
Last question.
Yeah, in your presentation you raised a paradox, and you didn't offer any answer. My question is whether the inequality or the income dispersion is somehow related to an answer.
Of course. It's a very important phenomenon. It's not only a problem, it's also a symptom of something that goes on in the economy.
You said that we don't have to fight unions, yet in your lecture you said that the high-tech industry in Israel is really booming and it's really saved the economy. And by correlation alone, you know that there's no organized crime, organized labor in the high tech. So by that correlation, shouldn't we do fight the unions? Shouldn't we do use?
No. You see, this is why I really believe in democracy. Those people working in the high-tech industry didn't think that they need unions. And they're right. They don't need unions. And gladly, no one forces them to have unions. All right? So the laws in Israel are flexible enough to leave alone, to let alone those very productive sectors.
Okay.
Thank you.